Welcome. I'm Prashant. I'm a senior product manager at AWS. And today, we're going to talk about multi-channel user engagement using Amazon Pinpoint and Amazon Cognito. This is a quick overview of what we're going to discuss. We will start by discussing what we mean by user engagement, and I'll do this using an example scenario. Then I'll give you an overview of each of the two services that we'll discuss today, Amazon Pinpoint and Amazon Cognito. I will then define an objective for you as an app developer that you can achieve using these services, and we'll discuss the implementation of that objective using the two services. I will go into details showing you demos of how you can do this and leave certain actions as exercises for later. And we'll have time to answer questions as well. All right, let's get started. So what is user engagement in the context of this discussion? Let's say you are an app developer who owns and runs a sports fans application. I'm sure a lot of you listening have built really successful applications. I'm just going to use this as my example for the discussion. Let's say the sports fans application does a few things for the users. It delivers sports news and schedules for when various games are going to take place, what's happening with the games, with the players, with the team management. It also delivers live scores and results as the games are happening in real time. And finally, maybe it also lets you purchase tickets and merchandise. Why not? So that's your application. You have 1 million users coming in every day, multiple millions maybe. And you want to be able to make sure that these users are engaged and are coming back to your application, because ultimately that's what's going to grow and sustain your business. So let's take a very specific example of how you might want to engage users in an application like this. Maybe there's a game going on and you want to send live score updates to your users through push notifications on their smartphones. And additionally, you want to set up a weekly email digest based on the user's favorite teams. Now, each of your users is going to have their own favorite teams among the multiple teams out there. You want to be able to tune the content to match their preferences. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's say those are your objectives, and you want to figure out a way to solve these objectives in the most seamless and efficient manner. So that's where Amazon Cognito and Pinpoint come in, and I will discuss how you can achieve this objective. A quick overview of the two services. Amazon Cognito provides a feature called user pools, which is extremely relevant for the discussion that we're having today. Now, the first thing you want to do with this objective that we just discussed is be able to identify who a user is and manage their identity as they use the app. And that's exactly what Cognito user pools lets you do. It does three main things. The first is serverless authentication and user management. This basically lets you sign in, sign up your users, either on their smartphones or on web browsers. And the great thing about it is you don't have to worry about the server infrastructure or the backend that takes care of all of this. Cognito does that for you, right? So that was number one. The second is a managed user directory. As we said, your sports fans application is probably extremely popular and it has millions of users coming in every day. You want a service that's reliable and that can securely manage these millions of users signing in and signing out each day. And that is precisely what Cognito offers through user pools. It's a low-cost, secure, simple, and fully managed service to create and maintain a user directory. And most importantly, it scales to hundreds of millions of users without you having to worry about the reliability. So that was number two. The third is enhanced security. Now, in a world where it's becoming increasingly important to ensure secure applications and protecting your users' identity and data, Cognito takes that fear off of your mind as well. It helps you protect against compromised credentials, bots. You can verify phone numbers and email addresses, and also offer adaptive multi-factor authentication. So that's it. It's as simple as that. 1, 2, 3. So a great way to think of what Cognito User Pools does for you is in these two categories. The first is end user flows. These are the things that your users are seeing on their devices, be it smartphones or web browsers. You can provide features like signing in and signing up. Users could update their profiles, like their address, their email, their phone number. I've forgotten passwords in the past. I'm sure you have. Cognito User Pools lets you take care of that as well. You can also do email and phone number verification and multi-factor authentication using Cognito User Pools. So that's on the end user side. And then there's the administrator capabilities, which you will do as the owner of this sports fans application that we spoke about. Here, you can do things like creating and managing user pools. You can also manage settings specific to each user pool. You can customize your sign-in option. We've seen cases where app developers have users sign in through email, some through phone numbers, some through just the username. Cognito provides all of those options to you. You can also define profile attributes for your user pools, set password policies, and search and manage users. So that's a quick and easy reference for the two categories that Amazon Cognito helps you with user pools. Now let's discuss Amazon Pinpoint. The Pinpoint is a user engagement service. And once you've figured out how to sign in and sign up your users through Cognito, you now want to start capturing user information. And that's exactly what Pinpoint helps you with. The first is user analytics. So your users have signed in. Now they've started using your app and the various features in the Sports Fans application. You want to be able to track which features are popular, how much time users are spending in your application, how often they're coming back. Maybe they're making purchases for tickets and merchandise. You want to be able to track how many purchases they're making. User analytics lets you do all of that out of the box with just a few lines of code. All right, you've collected all of this user analytics data. What do you do with it? Well, you want to be able to segment these users based on this data. Pinpoint lets you do that as well. You can define segments of users based not just on user events, but also on their preferences. And this is great for the application and objective that we are discussing, where users would have their favorite teams and their favorite players. Finally, once you understand how users are using your application, and you've segmented them based on that understanding, you would then want to send messages and engage these users and have them coming back to your application. And Pinpoint lets you do that in a personalized way where you deliver custom content to these users at the right time. Here's a 360 view of how all of this comes together. You start by capturing events. You can do that through Android and iOS mobile SDKs. They abstract a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You only need to add a couple of lines of code to capture events. Pinpoint also offers API support. So if you want to report events from your server backend, you can do that as well, in addition to what you're collecting from your devices. And you can also capture analytics on how your messaging channels are performing. Are your messages getting delivered? Are they being opened? So on and so forth. Once you've captured events, as we discussed, you then want to understand user behavior and segment users. Now, to do that, in addition to these events that you captured, you can assign attributes to these users. There are standard attributes that Pinpoint offers out of the box, like the device make and model, the platform, country, and so on. But you would have your own custom attributes that you want to define for your users, like favorite teams, favorite players, whether they're interested in live scores or news updates. You can do all of that through custom attributes. Now, it's also possible that you've collected some user attribute information on your server backend, and you want to be able to bring that in to enhance what you can do with Pinpoint. Pinpoint enables you to do that as well through S3 import of these user attributes. Once you've done both of these actions, which is capturing events and assigning attributes, you can then segment your users. And you can use those segments to target messages to these users. Today, Pinpoint supports sending messages through email, SMS, and mobile push across various mobile platforms. And because you've collected all of these custom attributes for your users, you can personalize the message that you're sending them. We've all been there where we get these generic messages from apps that are not really tuned to our preferences. They don't do the job. In fact, if anything, they tend to annoy your users. So the neat thing with collecting user attributes through Pinpoint is you can customize those messages. Now, once you've done that, you would still want to test the message you're sending them. Maybe you're not entirely certain that the copy you've come up with is the ideal copy that you want to send in the message. In those circumstances, you could A/B test and check for yourself which of the two copies you've come up with is actually performing better. Now, all of this data on the A/B tests and the messages that you've sent out gets funneled back in, a full 360 back into the events capture. What that means is you can then use historical performance of your messages to determine what you want to do with future messages. Let's say some of your users are not really clicking on messages and opening them. Maybe you want to avoid sending those users those messages because they're not really interested. Or maybe you tune your messages to be better so that they do get interested and open those. So that was a summary of Amazon Pinpoint and Amazon Cognito. These are great for the objective that we have on hand, which is we want to be able to identify and authenticate our users. We then want to understand their preferences, and we want to send messages to them. So let's talk about that. Here's a quick recap of the objective we discussed right at the start. You want to be able to send a live score to your users. There's a game going on right now, and you want this message to get to them as soon as possible, so you would use a push notification that goes to their smartphones. In parallel, either you or a marketer at your organization wants to set up a weekly email digest based on the user's favorite team or favorite player. So this would be this weekly email that talks about the events that transpired during that week, specific to the teams or players that the user is interested in. So that's the objective that I'm now going to try and achieve through Pinpoint and Cognito. Let's see how that works. The very first thing you would do as the owner of the Sports Fans application is you would go and create a project on Mobile Hub for this application. Once you've done that, your first step is to enable Cognito user sign-in. Here I'm going to pick email and password as my method of signing in users. I'm just going to select username as my preferred way of signing in. I'm going to make my life easier by reducing the requirements on the password, but you probably don't want to do that in production. Maybe let's also reduce the minimum length of the password to make it extra easy and create a user pool. And that's it. You now have a user pool that lets you authenticate and identify the users that are signing into your Sports Fans application. Once you've created your user pool to sign in your users, the next step, as we discussed, is to collect user analytics. Now, the neat thing about Pinpoint and Cognito is that they work together to do a lot of this heavy lifting on your behalf. So you would first go to your user pool on the console and enable analytics for the Cognito app client. You would then go to select the Pinpoint project that's going to receive this analytics data. This project is the same project that you've created on Mobile Hub. Make sure you share your user profile data with Pinpoint because that's how Pinpoint understands what the email ID is of the user so that you can message them later. You finally create an IAM role, which allows Cognito to write data to Pinpoint on your behalf and do that heavy lifting for you automatically. And you're all set. Once your user signs in through the application, Cognito automatically sends the user's ID, the information, their email, how often they sign in, how many users signed up on a given day. Maybe you had authentication failures for some reason. Cognito reports those as well to Pinpoint. All right, now that we're done with signing in our user and setting up the analytics that goes to Pinpoint, let's move on to see how this sign-in works in a sample application. Now, this sample application is the same one that is made available to you on Mobile Hub. Feel free to download it for yourself and take a look. I'm just going to quickly show you how the sign-in works for the user pool that we just created. If you remember, I chose username as my preferred way of signing in. I gave myself an easy password so we don't take too long in the demo. Let's see if it understands who I am. There it is. Sure enough, it knows I signed in with my username. There's a unique identifier that you can later use to target this user. Easy peasy. Now that we've signed in our user, let's go ahead and assign some attributes. Which team is this user interested in our sports fans application? This you will do using Pinpoint. And with just a couple of lines of code, Pinpoint allows you to assign user attributes, which in this case, we're going to talk about the favorite team. Let's see how you can do that. Oops. So I first start by creating an instance of the user on Pinpoint. And now I want to assign an attribute to this user. As we discussed, we want to know what the user's favorite team is. Maybe this is something they do in your application by going to a view, there's a list where there's a list of teams and they select their favorite one. And all you have to do on the client using the Pinpoint SDK is create a new attribute called favorite team and assign the name of the team. I am a big fan of FC Barcelona, so that's what I've picked here. And once you've assigned the attribute, you then want to update your Pinpoint targeting client with this attribute. What this does is it tells Pinpoint that this user's favorite team is FC Barcelona. Please update the instance of the endpoint that you have on the backend on Pinpoint. And it's really as simple as that, just 2 lines, and you now understand this user's preferences. Let's now go make use of this preference that we just collected. And the way we're going to do that is by creating a segment of users based on their favorite team. To do this, you're going to use the Pinpoint console. As you can see, you have 4 categories that you can interact with on this console. You have analytics, segments, campaigns. Let's talk about segments right now. I am just going to go ahead and name my segment FC Barcelona fans or people interested in live scores. Why not? As you can see, you can select a bunch of criteria to define what this segment is. In this case, I'm just going to select people whose favorite team is FC Barcelona. And you're all set. It's as simple as that. Now, as I mentioned, you can also import segments if you don't want to use the information collected purely from the client. Maybe you have some information lying on the back end about these users. You can absolutely do that using S3 imports. All right, so we've signed in a user. We've collected their attribute from the device. We then got to the Pinpoint console and created a segment of users that are interested in FC Barcelona live scores. Now it's time to send a message. For this, you will create a campaign on Pinpoint. I'm going to start by naming my campaign the live scores campaign. An interesting thing to note here is you could also do all of this through the API programmatically. You don't have to use the console. But if you have a marketer who wants to do this using the console, then that's available too. So what I've done is I've used my previously defined segment for people interested in FC Barcelona. And now Pinpoint offers you a messaging UI where you can define a title and a message that you want to send your users. I would encourage you to look up some of the features on the console which allow you to customize this message. You can actually input the user's name right in the message to make the message extra personal. I've just made up the fact that Messi scored a goal. Now, let's spend a little time on this section. You can schedule your campaign with a range of options. You can either send the message immediately. In this case, we want to do that because it's a live score notification. But there could be cases where you just want to send the message once. Maybe you want to send a message hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly. As you would have guessed, we're going to use the weekly option shortly later when we're setting up the email campaign. And Pinpoint also offers a neat and handy feature called quiet time. Maybe you don't want to bother your users in the middle of the night, so you could go and set that option right there to define what periods of the day are okay to send them a message. Here I'm just going to select immediate because that's our need. And you're all set. You have a message, you have the time schedule, and you just launch your campaign. Pinpoint delivers messages to millions of users in under just a few minutes. It's extremely reliable and quick, so it's great for use cases like live score push notifications. Now, let's go on and set up the email campaign that we spoke about. This is the weekly email digest that gives your users news about their favorite teams. You're again going to use the user attribute that you recorded from the client. I will talk about creating a new segment in this case because we want to separate our email user segment from our push notification or live score subscribers. You could also A/B test the campaign if you choose to. I'm not in this case. I'm going to create a new segment, call it weekly email users for FC Barcelona, and select the user attribute that we recorded from the client. You could do a holdout if you want. And again, here you have a neat message composer with a host of options that you want to show up in the email. You could attach images, you could attach links, basic formatting. And the email message composer, again, supports personalizing the message using user attributes. So let's say you were using the API to do this. You don't actually have to say Barcelona. You could just say user.favorite-team, and it knows what that team is. It fills it in for you. Because this is a weekly email, I'm going to set the weekly option. Pick a start date and an end date. As you can see, you also have a user local time option where you want this weekly email to get to your user at a specific local time. Maybe your users enjoy reading email more in the evening once they're back from work. You could understand this through the data that you captured on Pinpoint and then use that option when you set up future email campaigns. And you're all set. Once you launch this campaign, your emails start going out weekly. Your push notification for the live score has already reached all of your user devices. Now, as the owner of the application, you want to see how these messages are performing, and Pinpoint provides that on the console as well. You can go look at that campaign that you just ran and check how many messages were delivered, how many were opened, what's the open rate, what's the delivery rate, and a really handy session heat map. Now, this helps you identify what time of the day is ideal for the kind of messages that you're sending, which obviously makes a lot more sense for the email digest that you're sending and less for the live score. But Pinpoint provides this to you in a very handy way on the console. And you're all set. So to quickly recap what we did, we signed in our users through Cognito by setting up a user pool on the console. We then hooked up the Cognito user pool with Pinpoint analytics to let the two services automatically register user activity. We then went on to Pinpoint, used the mobile SDK to record a user attribute. In this case, we talked about the favorite team. You then come to the Pinpoint console to set up a push notification campaign to send the live score. And then you set up a weekly email digest based on the user's local time, again, using that custom attribute that you captured. And finally, you can come check how your message campaigns are doing on the Pinpoint console. So that pretty much sums up what we want to discuss here today. This is a specific example where we walk through push notifications and email, but you can see how you could easily extend this to SMS, which is another channel that Pinpoint provides. You also have the option of using event attributes to further customize your message. All of these I will leave as an exercise for you to go take a look. And feel free to ask questions about other features or support that either of these two services provide. Thank you, and I hope this has been useful and will help you grow user engagement for the fantastic application that you've built and you're running.